So there were two themes I wanted to explore in the book. The first one was that as somebody who'd been observing this space for nearly 30 years, which is slightly terrifying, I was acutely aware that we go through different cycles with how workplaces respond to the gender gap in all its various forms, and that we were, I think, defaulting back to a really kind of dangerous space, which was pretty much blaming women for their own marginalisation and then expecting them to solve it, which actually is illogical. And that disturbed me on a number of fronts. It wasn't just irritating, I think it really sends us backwards because it reinforces every one of the stereotypes that causes the problem in the first place.
Are you actually saying women shouldn't change? Do they need not to do it?
No, I'm saying actually women are human beings. You know that old definition of, the most radical definition of feminism? Women are people. Everyone needs to change, everyone needs skills, everyone needs to upgrade and have a mentor and so on. What I was trying to tease out in the book by my analysis is this idea, though, that women, because of their gender, need a particular set of remedial action so that their skills come up to scratch, I think is undermining.
But I mean, it's a... this is a broader issue than this. If you have any kind of bias, any kind of prejudice that has been entrenched over generations and you attempt to address it, the current generation says, we didn't create this, why should we pay for it? Yeah. How do you answer?
I mean, that's an interesting way of putting it. I don't know that I've heard it. What I have heard is the current generation saying, look, we don't see the world in the way you did. When we get into those positions, we won't behave in that way. So sometimes you hear that, there'll be this generational shift. And in my last book, I was very clear about it. We don't have any evidence to show that that's the case, actually, because once people get into formal hierarchies, workplaces where they're negotiating money and status and identity, usually all bets are off. And if the system works in a certain way, human beings tend to get with it and understand where the power lies and what you need to do to get ahead. I think, again, for many years I thought this was about logic, but this is a highly emotional debate. It goes to the way people see themselves, to how they see society operating, to how their family operates. So I think that possibly one could actually underestimate the strength of resistance to some of these changes.
Historically, it's easy to kind of just rely on the way that things have always been done, whereas a fundamental disruption like that forces us to actually have to really stop and think, how should we do this?
And stop relying on words like merit, which I think actually let's talk about skills, qualification, experience, but make it more nitty-gritty actually, instead of relying on these really woolly concepts. And merit is such a subjective concept, isn't it? So actually sometimes when you do that and you just sort of have to sit down and actually redefine, it just makes it clearer. Yeah.
That's right. And instead really having to
executive presence.
We've got really nothing to rely on in terms of how has this worked before. It's, well, how should this work? What are we looking for? What sort of a culture? What behaviours do we need?
So, I mean, you mentioned that you were an optimist. What sort of interventions do you see as working?
Yeah, well, some of the examples that are in the book, and none of these will deliver change unto themselves, but I suggest that there's a whole series of small steps that can. There's no silver bullet here. Some of them are around recruitment. I like the idea, and a number of organisations are using this in Australia, of blind applications, so you blank out the name. In the UK, I saw this had been used with some of the big law firms because they were recruiting mainly Oxbridge graduates, which would probably surprise none of us. So they blanked out the name of university, redacted the university on applications, and they found quite a big shift quite quickly. Some of that's kind of interesting. I think Martin Parkinson, when he was at Treasury, did a big review. They worked out that they were taking graduates, and a year after those graduates joined Treasury, the women were disproportionately siphoned into relationship roles and the young men into analytical roles. And guess which was the main career path in Treasury. So I think tracking that, making sure that you don't have something going on there around bias, about jobs. One of the other ones that's slightly different, Lance Hockridge brought in something quite interesting. He established an internal male champions of change group. And as he said to me, Catherine, these were rough diamonds. These are railway guys. But he said they came up with some fascinating programs, and one was around banter and humour in the workplace, which can be really passive-aggressive. So they had a speak up, speak out campaign. which gave people permission to say, what do you mean by that? When something was said, you know, a just joking comment that wasn't really just joking. I think it's fascinating. I've actually been telling Defence about it because there's a whole lot of work that's been done in Defence around banter and how it can exclude people. And this is the kind of informal stuff, isn't it? Really hard to get a grip on. Anyway, that apparently has, you know, not great leaps forward, but has had an effect. It's been a little bit of a circuit breaker about conversations and so on. So there's just 3 quite small examples, but it is about a mosaic of different kinds of things that can be done. And the men that I'm mentioning call these interventions. They actually say they deliberately look at the way the system works and intervene in it.
We saw with AXI quite a sort of important intervention last week. Is that the kind of intervention that works?
Look, I think it is, because if you think about when you sit around a listed board table and you're up for re-election, or your remuneration report is up for a vote, which happens every year, AXI's threat to vote against the re-election or election of directors and the remuneration reports of companies where there are no women on the board, I would have thought every ASX company, and more than the 200, which is serious about getting their remuneration report through and not having a strike, not having directors have large protest votes, I would have thought that's going to be taken very seriously. And AXI is serious about it because they believe, as I do, that there is a business case for genuine diversity beyond gender around a board table. If we've got 5 or 6 or 7 people who all come from similar backgrounds and think similarly, why do you think you're going to get great business outcomes?